HST 2024, and congratulations for making it this far. My name is Ted. I will be your chair for this round. I will let, I use he and pronouns. I will let my panelists introduce themselves from left to right.
Taira, she, her,
All right, cool. Let's do team introductions. So name, speaker position, and pronouns if you wish to disclose them. Starting with opening government.
Speaking first, Terrence, he, him.
second is Catherine.
Opening opposition.
Speaking first on opening office.
Second, Eric Lee, he, him.
Closing government.
First, Andy, he, him.
Second,
And closing opposition.
speaking first, Bill Cotton, him.
All right, I thank all teams for those introductions. Motion for the House reads, assuming feasibility, this House means that humankind should strive to continually expand across this galaxy. Okay, I will now invite the Prime Minister to deliver the first address in the motion to their name of not exceeding 5 minutes 15 seconds.
All right, thank you, speech, because this is my first open final. Shout out to Nathan Yang. He's 6'2" and single, by the way. Thank you to my partner, Catherine. Thank you to OrgCom, TDs, everyone who's been making this tournament a wonderful experience. All right, time will begin my first word. I'll also be recording the speech for myself. I want to start the speech with a very simple premise. Space exploration has incredibly substantial potential benefits to the world, and the way that we use Earth is quite unsustainable in status quo. On that basis, Stan set up the two constructive arguments in the speech. My first constructive is on the vast potential benefits of space and galaxy exploration, and the second argument is as to why there's large certain impacts of space travel in this round. Firstly, stance and setup. 1. Assuming feasibility means that this technology likely already exists, given that it's possible to travel. So things like rockets or jets or new exploration tech probably already exist, and cross-application of technology is likely already implemented and non-exclusive to their side of the house. Given this, any argument in terms of opportunity cost on funding is probably not super substantial, given we don't need much new R&D in order for this space exploration in the first place. 2. We support continuous exploration, given there's always more and more space that is likely to be unexplored with equal amounts of potential benefits. On that basis, first constructive argument on the vast potential benefits of galaxy travel. And here's the premise. There are many issues in Earth that simply we cannot fix on Earth. Things like a lack of space due to unimaginable overpopulation, a lack of resources in the very short future, and things that are just simply unimaginable with no real fixes in humanity. Given this, if Earth is likely to blow up or have no water, there's not any real way to fix this on Earth. I think it is quite intuitive that there's a large chance of salvation with a new planet and galaxy. Things like new life, new habitable places, and new resources. This is probably the largest impact in this round. Why is this worth it to actually explore? Firstly, I think a lot of things are speculative in life. Maybe mitigating climate change is something that is speculative with things like new research and new technology. But clearly, the impacts are so large and so substantial that we value these things and we value trying to achieve these ends in of themselves. So insofar as this is true, we think it is perfectly fine to try and go towards galaxy travel. But secondly, I want to explain why these impacts are actually somewhat likely to land. Firstly, because the universe is simply so large. There are a lot of different planets, there are a lot of different variables that come into play, and that means there's likely to be an instance in which the circumstances align and the stars align in the correct instance, and Earth, a new planet, is actually habitable in the first place. 2, I think there have been things like signs of traits or signs of life that have been found on other planets like Mars, things like fossils and waters, and they're likely to continue to be found outwards. Thirdly, the world and all planets are composed very similarly in terms of just basic science. So they all orbit around things like suns, they all orbit around things like stars, they all have concepts of things like gravity. So it's highly likely that given these structures likely apply across the entirety of the universe, given they have the same fundamentals in terms of how they exist, we think it is incredibly likely that potential benefits actually do, in fact, exist. But thirdly, I think opposition in this round will need to be incredibly comparative to mitigate our benefits. Because maybe it is true our benefits are speculative, they need to prove why their benefits are more likely, or at the very least, very certain in this round, in order to have that be a valid criticism on our side of the house. On to the second argument, why there are large certain impacts of space travel. Before that, PY closing. Opening? Cool. On to the second argument, on the large certain impacts of space travel. The first argument explained why they're probably the biggest impacts in this round are in the potential impacts where it's largely speculative. Given this, we think there are largely certain impacts in this round as well. I think there are largely three impacts of this round that are certain or really likely within space travel. The first is in terms of education. It is things like a better understanding of the universe in terms of things like physics or space, understanding gravity far better when there are more things that are not just in the solar system, given that it could be simply an anomaly. It's things like understanding crop yields or crop cycles, which were in fact benefits that were gained from things like satellites in the past and are very likely to continue in the future. Given these benefits, a lot of things like space travel and understanding the planet do in fact have benefits that are very tangible to the Earth in the first place. The second is in terms of narratives of hope. I think this is very likely on our side of the house. It is the narrative that anything is possible if we put our mind to it, that maybe it is true that there's other places outside of Earth, even if we do it in a horrible way. Or it's things like there's no limit to the economy or no limit to what we can do as humanity. But notably, I think it is also a narrative in terms of a sense of security. Because when we explore more about the world, when we know more about the world, there's less fear about things like alien invasions, or there's less fear about the unknown, which are largely speculative impacts that they need to contend with in this round. Go ahead.
So, don't you believe that, this the most unsustainable lifestyle to secure our resources on our planet is hope of space exploration?
No, I think there are largely still incentives to try and be sustainable on our side of the house. Obviously, there's only one Earth. Maybe there's another planet, but obviously going towards that place is going to cost a lot of resources, and it's probably not in the direct incentives to try and actually have to resort to these mechanisms in the first place. The third is in terms of fulfillment. It is a fulfillment of knowing more about the world, or simply a happiness in terms of humanity's achievements. It is things like happiness or fulfillment of the US's achievements of landing on the moon, or things like the Mars rover that NASA has implemented. Given all these large and certain impacts in this round, it is very certain and very clear that OG has taken this round. Very happy to sound OG.
Thank the Prime Minister for that speech. I now call upon the Leader of Opposition to introduce the case of the opposition that SA holds.
Okay, great. Before I start, thank you speech. Thanks to Terrence, he's also 6'2" in Sangle. And yeah, thanks to my partner Eric. Thank you to Orcom, TDCAs, everyone who made this tournament very enjoyable. Yeah. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Setup and then two arguments. The first on why expansion is likely to be ineffective and have a low return. The second is on decreased innovation. Refutation to Terrence will be integrated. On setup, this motion is vague in nature, so the most important question to ask out of OG was what this expansion looks like and the difference between expansion and maintenance. We thought there were two possibilities to define expansion. The first is expansion in the form of things like colonies, so think about colonies on Mars, or it's implied in the wording of the motion. Second, expansion in the form of expanding our reach. This is probably unlikely because it's very wear and tear. You have things like time commitment and resource commitment. Notably, we think expansion exists in the form of constant increase in investment towards space programs. So think about subsidizing private companies such as SpaceX or continuing to fund government programs like NASA. On the first argument, we think there are two main groups who can carry out expansion across the galaxy as of right now. So this looks like mega corporations or conglomerates who have massive capital, or second, governments. There are a few reasons why each are bad and will lead to very bad endpoints. The first is on corporations. The first mechanism here is that private space exploration will pollute space but beyond usability. And this is because private incentives encourage risk and damage to space. So private space companies have two incentives: to do things first and to do them cheap. They need to finish their designs before the competitors to attract investors for future projects. They need to finish their designs cheaply to maximize investment return and to corner the market. Additionally, private companies are just very, very nearsighted. We think this is just empirically true. So those funded by venture capital need to produce results as quickly as possible because their investors are evaluating their investment on a quarterly basis, and they're very rarely willing to fund risks that remain risk for more than a couple of years. So the reason why government regulations of private space travel fail is because space travel is such a niche market that only people like Elon Musk will have the time or the will or the money to lobby and influence space travel regulations. So as a result, regulations will always be lax. And this looks like a shuttle in development by SpaceX, like Starship, is literally predicted to kick massive amounts of dust and rocks into lunar orbit, which threatens the navigation systems of unmanned satellites and even the ISS. And despite these predictions, SpaceX has done nothing to alter the model that they currently have. So we think that space debris is a deciding impact in this round. There are two key things to note about it. First, space debris exponentiates rapidly. So that is to say that the issue is that when companies like SpaceX introduce more space debris into the atmosphere, it exponentiates the risk that errant pieces of debris collide, right? Which means that you break apart into yet more pieces of debris and so forth. Second, it is also impossible to identify the point of return of no return for space debris. So even if you think corporations might have an incentive to limit space debris as time passes, we may well have reached the point of no return before they reach that epiphany. The second mechanism is on how profit incentives prohibit humanitarian research that Prop wants to claim. So there's an incredible lack of return on investment. There's critical humanitarian research that can only be done in space. Simply put, this research is not profitable. Critical disease and water purification research is hardly profitable to begin with. But when done on Earth, charities can run with the aid of donations. When you branch out into space and you try to claim these benefits, it's going to be incredibly hard and you're going to get a lack of return on investment. When we add the necessary overhead cost of billions of dollars to conduct research in space, no amount of donation drives could make this research profitable. So governments are the only organization in the world who can actually conduct this research, and we'll explain why they can't later. On governments, there are three reasons why they largely cannot conduct space travel or space expansion well. The first is on public will. The public will to fund space travel has declined very steadily since we landed like the first man on the moon. Around the world, the value of space travel is difficult to pitch to the average person, and the unwillingness of voters to dedicate a meaningful amount of tax dollars to space travel means that government space programs are fundamentally more limited than private, and this funding was only going to decrease with time. The second is on risk aversion. Governments, meaning that failures like the Columbia's crash, devastate public space programs. So such mistakes are going to occur, which means that space travel is going to be seen as more complicated and more dangerous. But also, governments get very little administrative recognition for space shuttle advancements, either for space expansion or for research done in space. So all that recognition probably goes to people like scientists, right, who achieve these feats. So even if we do concede to OG setup on feasibility, sure, it can be done, but it's going to be very low quality and have a low return. The implication of this argument is this: space exploration is either going to be one, low funded and ineffective, or two, motivated by perverse incentives and benefits you get from prop are unable to be accessed by the average individual, given that the resources within space are likely to be scarce and expensive. We thought this was much better comparatively. This is because we have empirically seen results in industries on Earth, like medicine, like innovations for technology, etc., which help us to live better lives right now. On decreased innovation. So in order to expand space exploration, institutions focus on two goals. The first is on resource efficiency, which is where you get bang for the buck, and the second is on resource allocation, which is ensuring nothing is wasted. Note, when we increase efficiency, the goal is to use concepts we currently know and to maximize their potential. The issue is that innovation requires an amount of resources focused on answering questions. So for example, we used to ask what the pancreas needs and found that it was insulin. On prop, innovation decreases because they don't have enough resources to allocate towards a research department. Their focus is on having a product to show to investors. On opposition, we have more innovation. Our focus is on finding things we can cross-apply to our current life to make our current lives on Earth better. Incredibly proud to oppose.
I remind all speakers to try to get POIs and to try to take them. I now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for side government.
Okay. You good? Since the beginning of time, where humankind began to grow, people started exploring Earth. It is not that it is necessary to know that the Earth is not actually flat, but mass amounts of human developments has happened since people learned about the solar system, that the Earth is actually a sphere. It's that innate curiosity that humankind had that promoted them to have any developments that are like very beneficial to the humankind in general. Two things I'll be dealing with in today's speech. First, on the potential concerns and benefits, and second, on the certain. I think potential is the most important concern in today's debate, given that it is feasible, which OO largely focused on, but second, that it is actually beneficial if with this risk-reward effect. First thing OO give us on potential is that people will stop trying to be sustainable. This is not right for a few reasons. In the status quo, these private corporations already don't want to be sustainable. The fact that we have so many regulations and restrictions means that these people have like short-term profiting incentives. They are not really sustainable on their side. But why is it that the difference in policies and perhaps the loosening of environmental restrictions don't happen just because of the act of exploring? It is because that government always have incentives to not like let everyone on the earth die. There will always be restrictions environmental-wise and like development-wise if there are no direct and concrete alternatives, for example, another planet to live on. Before that's found, all these policies will not be loosened, restrictions will not be loosened. These are the potential things that opposition need to address down the bench. These are not things that they can just speculate because government always still have incentive to keep people living on the ground. But third of all, what is important in today's round is whether or not humankind in general should strive to expand the reach of humans. This means that there are mass amounts of humankind developments. It doesn't matter that it might be dangerous or we might not even find anything in a short amount of period of time, though I'll prove likelihood later on again. The fact that we explore the ocean, although we don't know what dangerous creatures there are in the ocean, is because of curiosity. It's because of the potential to discover things that will actually benefit us. It is because we actually explore the ocean that we're able to find like fossil fuel mines that we're going to be able to use for our society. All of these potential benefits will link directly to people on the ground. It shows that corporations don't have a limit, although in today's society, people are in despair because they feel like if we only have Earth as a planet, there's always going to be a limit to the amount of production that we can have, to the amount of developments that we can have in our economy, regardless of how sustainable our technology is. But another claim that OP give us is that like these private corporations are going to like just try to not be sustainable. First, it is likely that restriction and regulation still exist, and they say that SpaceX can't do anything in the status quo. They generate mass amounts of pollution. I want to look back to Terrence's framing on feasibility, and like that's given through the motion. Feasibility probably means that this influence and this exploration will probably not be so harmful that people will literally die from this exploration. That's not what feasibility means. It means that people can still live their regular lives and explore this thing. The reason that status quo the reason why SpaceX and other corporations in status quo don't have any access is because humans literally right now cannot get out of the solar system. But the fact that we still try so hard, that NASA still put mass amounts of funding, is because we know that all the developments we have gotten in the past was to some degree contingent on the fact that we continue to explore. It's because of the curiosity that human actually had that guaranteed us that we had these developments in the first place. The importance of exploring Earth, exploring different universe, galaxies, is that we find other civilizations if possible. We have these cultures that we can transfer together. This is a possibility. This is a potential of finding a replacement Earth to deal with all the issues we have in status quo. This is the importance because curiosity is what leads development, is what leads opportunity. This needs to be contested on a philosophical level on opposition bench. Second, though, uncertainty. This is something that opposition never really addresses. There are always going to be certain additional or marginal benefits that come with people's efforts towards development. Terrence phrased this really clearly. There will be education or cross-transferably benefits. Even if we don't find anything, we still probably find new Newton gravitational laws. These are all additional benefits that opposition also need to deal with or wash out if they want. Secondly, there are also narratives. In the status quo, many people believe in that as long as we have economic developments, they're always going to contradict our environmental concerns. So corporations and people feel that there is no hope. We have no ability to develop past things. And the fact that we can produce will always be restricted by environmental concerns. This is something that opposition also need to address. Because on proposition, we give people hope. We say that we can develop. But the point of feasibility is that this will happen. The importance, however, is on the philosophical matter. Why humankind need to explore these different spheres. Why we actually got the development from from actually discovering that Earth is not flat. We discovered mass amounts of developments, and this is because we did in the first place. Proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. I now call on the Deputy Leader of Opposition to introduce the case for the off bench. Also, the off.
I think they did thank you speeches. I'll do thank you speeches too. Thanks, Terrence. He's 602 and single. Nathan is 2. Thanks, Nathan, for being a good partner. Great content, great speeches. He got me by a lot. Thanks, Orcom, for the great tournament. I like the stuffies. I think it was really well run. And shout out to my mom in the back with my sister. Back corner there, she's waving. I won't be here without her or my dad. So, August, thank you. But also, just thank you. Shout out Ye Lao Shu. She's not here, but go. I love Ye Lao Shu. My other coaches are here with me in spirit. All right. I'll start my speech. Wait, is this volume good? Everyone can hear me, right? This is my phone. What? This phone? Yeah. It's black, yeah. All right. I'll start my speech here. Good? This is good volume? Okay. All right, buddy. While they hide behind their veil of complex words, proposition pushes the most important part of this motion away. We don't have the money to escalate space research across the Milky Way. We barely have enough to get to Mars. They say they want to invest millions to get Newton's law. We think we can use all that money into healthcare or other programs that benefit people in a tangible manner. It's for this reason we're very proud to oppose. 2 parts to this speech. First, just doing a little bit of clear up as to the misconceptions that proposition pushes. Second, 2 questions. 1, does space exploration falter the current system of, does expanding space exploration falter the current system of space exploration? And second, why does the increase in space exploration destroy current social systems? First, let's do a little bit of cleanup. The first thing to know is that they cannot just say we are not able to get tangible benefits and call it a day. They have to disprove all of Nathan's arguments, which is to say that none of the things that Catherine said, and for that matter, Terrence tried to preempt, were able to actually deal with our arguments. And the more important thing to note was that they were unable to actually tell us what the expansion of space exploration looked like. And we told you this from the start. Space exploration expansion looks like colonies on Mars because it's untrue that we are able to get space rockets to go across the entire Milky Way because we can barely get them to go to Mars. So it's more likely that we establish colonies across the Milky Way or across the galaxy, which is a huge investment into different ways. And it's something we can see in tangible ways, in this way that science fiction novels depict different different colonies. The way that The Martian showed Matt Damon on Mars making farming potatoes and how miserable that life would be. The first question, does expanding space research falter the current system of space exploration? First thing to say was that OG's claim was that increase in space exploration expands the creation of narratives. First thing, a couple problems. 1, it's unclear as to what this has to do with the increase of space exploration. Presumably, we can still feel unsafe by knowing, even if we know more. And it's empiric as well. So most of science is about doubting what we already know. Physicists often try to topple their own theories. Doctors question the quality of medications. Teachers question their teaching methods. And more importantly, we still have scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Stephen Hawking who push for the Big Bang Theory, that space is endless and we don't truly understand what it is. So even if it's the case that you're able to cover more grounds in space, you're still unable to get the complete part of space. And more importantly, people are still doubtful as to whether or not aliens are there. But the more important thing about this is that will never be able to truly accept aliens for who they are and never be able to truly assimilate with that identity. But they tend to miss in Terrence's argument was that we still have physical differences and mental differences with aliens. So it's hard to prove why it is that we'll accept this kind of ideology to begin with. And it's unclear as to why it is. Just knowing that these people exist is going to get people to be more comfortable with this concept. Regardless, the largest issue with their claim was that it sidelined the core of Nathan's argument, which was that the bureaucratic control over expanded space programs faltered the integrity of space exploration. And there's a couple ways that this happened. First, opportunity cost, where it's a constant investment, where you feel that you've invested too much and it's far hard for you to pull out all of your money. Second, in the form of space pollution, where private corporations have incentives to do things fast. They're unlikely to develop things to the best extent, and likely they pollute the earth when they're trying to innovate in terms of making better technology. Third is that you just can't access all of these things because it's too expensive for us to do so, and we don't have that kind of budget to begin with. And fourth, it was a decrease in political will, where governments become cornered to their actions. We're put into gridlock. And notice, we can't regulate any of these problems at an escalated scale. It's too complex and arbitrary in nature. How do we create patents over space? How do we deem resources to be private property? It's very hard for us to do so on such a large scale, but in a smaller scale, it's probably able to regulate because it's just a lot easier to be able to hold entities and corporations accountable. On our side of the house, we have more control over our programs. Less invested political will means that we have more money to invest into different social programs. It means that even in the worst case, we aren't able to get all the benefits that they want to point to, we're still able to get tangible benefits. It's the fact that we can have a functional healthcare system in areas like the US where people have to pay for healthcare. It's the fact that even in the worst case, we're able to get social programs where we can pay for people's education and be able to pardon them for university. Second, it was through less money invested, meaning that we have more breathing room. An important thing to note about this is that we can get more innovation from this. Because if it's the case we have less funding, scientists are more inclined to stretch their dollar because they feel as though they are very constrained to they have constraints put on them. If we expand research into space exploration, they feel as though they have more money to play with, and it's less likely for them to stay locked in, as per what Carol would tell me. On our side house, all the benefits that Terrence suggests are still prevalent. We still have access to diamond and copper found on asteroids because we are still maintaining space exploration. It's not expanding. We still have innovation in the form of creation of microwaves as a byproduct of telecommuting research that happened in World War II. And this answers this question, where you ask what kinds of results we can get on our side house. Now, to be clear, this should be weighed as the most important arguments to debate for two reasons. One, their arguments are speculative, but ours are tangible. The nearest exoplanet is 4.2 light years. You can do the math yourself in atomic units. But the nearest exoplanet is way too far for us to access, but we can still access asteroids at a far easier scale. So for this reason, we're proud to oppose.
Now, I thank the deputy leader for that speech. I now call for the member of government to continue the case for
Thank you to my partner Anthony and then Fei Yang for letting me sleep at his house. Yeah, and then Orcom. If it's true that continuous exploration is done by private corporations, then it's about the most lucrative and practical things that are achievable. This looks like resource extraction, and on CG, we're going to prove to you why this creates numerous benefits for the development of society in general. Most refutation is going to be fully integrated inside of our case. But before that, I want to give a key piece of framing that's quite important. O doesn't have any actual positive analysis. They explain that space exploration is bad because you're going to pollute the space, but they never explain what happens on the comparative. Is it that these people remain on Earth and then fund Earth enterprises, or is it that billionaires are going to invest in cryptocurrency? Realize that none of these things have actual benefits on their side. So they can rip apart space exploration as much as they want, but there's no way for them to win this round whatsoever. We're going to uniquely show you what their things can happen. And notably, capital is only accessible on our side. There's no opportunity cost for governments to be able to spend money on space, given all the reasons that every side has told you. And therefore, the only individuals who are actually going to explore space are private corporations. If they don't do continuous space exploration, then their side has none of these benefits whatsoever. This argument is going to be quite simple. We think that there are three large implications of exploring space, and all those are good. The first is that in the process of expanding and exploring space, there are tangible benefits that you occur, and we think that those uniquely are going to be guaranteed advancements. And given that we assume feasibility that you can explore space, it's unclear how developed your technology is. So maybe it's good enough to visit a few other planets, maybe you can set up a Mars colony, but there's always work that can be done. And whenever you invest into these things, it looks like investment directly into R&D. But R&D obviously isn't just going to be funneled into space. There's other things that are cross-applicable that are just as significant. For example, if you have AI ships, controlled ships, these are direct advancements into AI that can affect people on the ground inside of Earth. If you have things like medical research on how gravity and aging works inside of space, these are also cross-applicable technologies that can be used for things like health of individuals. There are certain materials that react differently inside of space that you can also use, given like the new environment. We think that the most important aspect of all this is that because technology is so cross-applicable inside of these fields, whenever you fund space exploration in the first place, there are a variety of guaranteed benefits that can then go back to use on Earth. So even if you end up finding nothing whatsoever, we think that the process is still important. Secondarily though, and more importantly, we think that there is a potential benefit of resource extraction that no side has touched upon inside of this. And notably, Earth isn't sustainable. It's not about finding a new habitat. It's about finding more resources so that we can currently just make Earth a little bit longer. Because maybe we are unable to find the closest new planet, especially if it's that far away. What we can do is that we can find new materials to make it so that we're able to house the overpopulated areas. We're able to find things like more rare metals that are only uniquely in space through things like asteroid mining. But more importantly, there are isotopes of certain elements that are uniquely abundant inside of space that can be then used inside of planet Earth. This looks like, for example, helium-3, which is used for things like energy and nuclear research. These are only uniquely abundant inside of places like space. We think that you can also have things like solar farms, whatever. There's a plethora of ways in which you're able to extract resources and then use that technology on Earth. Or then you can funnel it back to using that technology on even more space funding in general. The third and final implication here is basically like space tourism. This offers, like, if you're going to build colonies like OO talks about, then you probably have things like jobs for construction, especially when there are already so limited jobs. This is like quite interesting. You're able to get people inside of this Earth. This is extremely different from what OO says, right? OO comes up and talks about finding a sustainable habitat. It's unclear whether or not you're able to do that whatsoever. We know asteroids actually exist. How do corporations then play a role? And this is where all the integrated analysis comes in. The first thing I want to point out here is that the comparative is far worse, because they're probably going to do the exact same pollution on Earth. And if they're not going to be polluting the Earth, then they're putting it into things that make them money, but probably aren't generally beneficial for the entire world, like cryptocurrency. It's unclear what benefits you're able to derive off of that in comparison to other things. You could also just create new things, I guess, but generally, we think that you're likely going to put it in other lucrative things that don't provide as many practical benefits. Secondly, though, we think that benefits that arise from space exploration will help every single individual. So if you look at helium-3, safer nuclear reactors probably affects every single individual. There's also a few reasons for why you get access. The first is because space is very abundant in these resources. The second is because there's going to be competition inside of these areas. And the third, quite simply, is because tech gets cheaper when you go over time. Here's the most important analysis, though. Just because something is inaccessible doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't be pursued. Chemotherapy is expensive, but it still exists for a reason because it is able to provide benefits towards individuals. So if OO banks their entire case on the fact that it is inaccessible, we would argue that throughout the long term, you're able to increase the accessibility of that, which is uniquely important. But beyond increasing the accessibility of it, we think that the existence of such resources and technologies is good in general when you're able to apply to the development of humankind, when you're able to have more innovation, and when you're able to have more access to all these things. For all these reasons given, we're very, very proud to propose.
Thank you, member of for that speech. I now call on member of opposition
I want to do a thank you speech. Sorry. The first thing I want to do is thank Christopher because he's an awesome partner. I partner with a lot of people, but Christopher's very clearly the best. Second thing, thanks to Orcom, TDs. Waterloo is probably my favorite tournament ever. You have Goose plushies, guys. I don't know. There's not a lot of people to thank. I guess everyone from Woodlands. Cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I don't care that Elon Musk gets cool space rocks and coal to play with when poor people are starving all around the world. We have one extension from closing opposition, which is going to win us the round. We're going to explain to you why the space race that begins on government side promotes inequality that fundamentally disadvantages the poor far more than they are in status quo. The first thing I wanted to do is frame who is going to actually expand across the galaxy. I think that to be able to grow and you have to have the technological capacity, and you need a lot of capital. This probably then looks like private companies who have incentives to go into space. What I also want to add is that this probably looks like multiple private companies. This isn't just one. This is probably the richest companies all going and trying to fight for the same finite amount of resources or the same finite amount of land and planets. The first part of this extension is going to explain how they go about trying to do these sorts of things. OO says regulations won't work, but this is unclear why this is the case. Don't companies have
have an incentive to be sustainable if it's benefiting themselves, what we're going to analyze is that the actual space race leads to competition between companies in like different private companies. This leads to unsustainable practices from companies because they are trying to achieve first mover advantages. So they are less willing to go and achieve the sustainability, which will in the long term be beneficial to their companies because they want to achieve that like a baseline level of first mover advantage and getting access to their resources. This looks like outsourcing work to underdeveloped countries and factories to try and get things done and produce things as quickly as possible, which leads to human rights abuses and resource abuses on their government side of the house. What I want to note then is that I think this is logically prior to their analysis about why space destruction happens, because we explain why there's an actual space race between companies, but we also give an Earth impact and explain why on the planet there's still going to be human rights abuses and environmental abuses. The second part of this extension is going to be explaining how they actually use the resources that are that they get. We think that companies are able to develop a monopoly over the resources that they have. I think that they often have a profit incentive to gatekeep and trademark the resources that they actually get. It's incredibly unclear to me why the average person in society and why everybody in society is going to benefit from the resources government side wants to claim they get, when literally private companies are the ones going and getting the resources, right? They probably are going to A, use these for their own production capacity to give them like a competitive edge in the marketplace, or B, raise their prices like crazy so that they can profit the most off of the new resources they're able to monopolize that they have unique access to, so that the richest are able to benefit from this and they get to make as much money as possible. These resources don't then get the huge broad benefits that government side wants to claim. I think they're then secluded to the most well-off people in society, which oftentimes increases the inequality gap between the rich and the poor. Because now not only do the rich have like more wealth or whatever, now they are able to access unique resources from other planets, which can presumably be good or whatever. I think that the impact for this part of the argument and this part of the extension is that there's more ability for the rich to dominate the poor. I think then that this increases the inequality gap. It gives less capacity for the poor to go and like be able to fight and like gain capacity to be the rich, but I also think it lowers the empathy quality or gap between rich people and poor people, because like they have more resources, there's more inequality, etc. But the third part of this argument is going to be explaining how they use the land that they take over. We think that private companies are able to monopolize planets and land that they actually take over. There are probably two uses that private companies are going to have for this land. The first use for this is for the sake of production and capitalism. We think that there's probably going to then be worse pollution and destruction of these planets when they go and like want to produce factories and they want to use these new resources that they have to like set up factories or whatever. This again is a better mechanism to access like these like sort of like space destruction impacts that opening opposition wants to talk about. The second thing I want to analyze though is for the sake of colonialism and habitats. I want to analyze uniquely here. I think that the richest and most well-off are going to be the ones who get to go and live in these societies. Why? If private companies are the ones taking them over for the sake of colonialism, there probably is some sort of profit incentive to do so. I think then there's probably going to be like high prices to be able to go into these planets or whatever. It's probably not the broad like all of society gets to move to these planets or whatever. Some people stay on Earth. Some people get to go to the finite amounts of land that you can get in the solar system and in other planets. I think that this leaves the impoverished behind when the richest are able to go into these other planets and leave behind the planets that they have. I want you to know that the counterfactual is far better on our side of the house, because there's now far more incentives to fix the planet on government side when you don't have the alternative of going to these other planets that they want to talk about. I think that note the nuance here. You don't access the benefits of getting a new planet to live on, because not everyone gets to go, but you access the lack of empathy for the people most well off and most capable of fixing the planet and who can actually solve the issues which are causing people in Africa, for example, to go through droughts and suffering, which cause starvation, which causes climate change, all these sorts of things. I think that on our side, you have far more incentives to fix the planet that is so fundamental to people living. Why does this extension win the round? Before that, I'll take a POI from opening, closing. Okay. The first thing I want to note is that we prove a burden much higher than opening opposition, because they attack definitions and say it's unfeasible. We have to pay too much money. But what we say is that even if it's feasible, the way it manifests in society is bad. The way that this increases an inequality gap, which means that the poor continue to suffer and the richest are the most well off, is bad. The way that this causes people to have less empathy and care for the planet, the way this causes far more human rights violations in this horrible space race is bad. We actually analyze the burden that opposition had. I think this beats opening opposition. But I also want to note that we think we flip what GovBench proves, and we show how their resources never go to the people who need it most, who never goes to the people who need the capacity to live, who need these sorts of things to improve their quality of life to a fundamental degree that allows them to live and thrive in society. I think we refuse to stand for a world where humankind strives to continuously expand the greatest inequalities of the world, where we're okay with people suffering if it means that some of us get to succeed. We are very proud to oppose.
I thank the member for that speech. I now call upon the government to conclude the case for government bench as a whole.
chill, bro. Yo, can I get your phone? Is everyone ready? Before I start my speech, I would like to shout out Fei Young, who unfortunately got dropped in quarters, and also my mom, who's watching me debate for the first time. The implications of galactic exploration are not limited in space. Water purification developed for astronauts in space allows kids in Africa to get more clean drinking water. That's a unique capital and the unique innovation that you uniquely access on CG. If that capital exists on both sides, we'd rather it be redirected to areas that can benefit the broader scope of society, and that is why we're incredibly proud to propose. I'm going to go team by team in this debate, starting with CO. CO's case here is that private companies develop resources and then keep it for themselves or make it very expensive. I have two responses to this argument that takes it down. The first is that Abdullah himself says that there are multiple private companies that suggest there's some sort of capitalistic competition incentive to keep these prices cheap. If multiple private companies are going against each other and they all explore and they all develop things such as resource extraction, they compete against each other in terms of prices in order to make sure that they have the most market power. And that suggests that these resources that you do get are likely to be somewhat accessible and cheap or priced at a relatively good range. The second is that private companies themselves have no direct usage of the resources that they extract. The way in which they profit is that they sell it to governments who need it for things such as power plants or the usage of that in their development and in their running. And given the competition analysis on the nature of private companies going against each other, it means that these are likely to be somewhat cheap and affordable, and in the long term, space exploration and the resources that come from it are likely going to be accessible in the long term. The weighing for this argument is as follows. On the long run, the more and more private companies are able to break into this industry, the more things and resources are able to emerge for the market, which suggests that there's somewhat of an accessibility claim that we can get on our side of the house. But secondly, it's that their comparative is that these resources and these advancements or innovations don't exist at all, and we would take the trade-off of that. And we think we are comparatively winning on that clash. In terms of opening opposition, I want to start the responses to opening opposition by characterizing what this resource extraction looks like. It's not colonies in Mars because, as Andy points out, that's not profitable. It is doing things such as exploring for resources valuable to the Earth. And this is a very, very lucrative industry and business. There is a huge first mover's advantage because of if you discover it, then you have the unique ability to extract those resources and sell it to things such as governments. There's a huge race between elite, which proves that there's an incentive to largely invest into these areas. This suggests two things. Number one, quarterly assessments that Nathan talks about are unlikely to going to be the business model because the end outcome is super lucrative, so they don't judge on the assessment of quarterly basis. But secondly, it's that this is a heavily lucrative industry and it has an incredible amount of benefit you can get if you are the first mover into discovering this, which suggests that there is very likely to attract large amounts of funding from things such as billionaires or larger corporations who want to invest in this money. The second thing they say is that this K-shift in DLO, which goes that you can use this money towards healthcare. I think this contradicts the reasons that Nathan gives you as to why private companies are the ones exercising this, which is that governments recognize that space exploration is very speculative, it is very risky, it is long-term, and it's not a large voting issue. So the capital that is within private companies cannot be redirected towards things such as social services because they're different actors and it's not actually like public versus private. So if it's not government capital that is being redirected, it's private capital that exists within the hands of the most elite, within billionaires. Why is this incredibly important? And I'll take you after this theme. The first is that if billionaires don't invest into these sorts of investments of a very high reward speculative industry such as space, they invest into alternative means that don't get the benefits such as benefiting innovation or things that benefit people on the ground. They invest in things such as stocks or venture capitalism of other risky projects. And the comparative difference is that these projects don't give the benefits to people on the ground in the process of creating it. It's the fact that oftentimes the process of exploring space means that you come up with technologies that help people on the ground and on Earth. And that's the unique benefit that we can claim. The weighing here is very simple. Even space exploration is imperfect. It is the best way of accessing this capital in the very first place that would have never been accessed on their side of the house. We would rather have the byproduct of the elite investment lead to the extraction of helium-3 for things such as nuclear energy rather than other investments. And that was why we beat out opening opposition. In terms of OG, their first claim, I'm going to weigh them claim by claim. Before that, yeah, sure.
And those things can flow down to people down on the ground. So it's just like AI can like use
Yeah, so the problem is that comparatively space exploration is much more lucrative than AI because the resources you find in space can be sold to governments. So that's the unique difference. On OG, their first claim is that you get potential benefits from space exploration. The reason why we outweigh is simply because our argument is not potential. On OG, it is very unlikely to find like a copycat version of Earth. But on our side, the impacts that come from the process of exploring space is guaranteed to happen as it historically has happened. The reason why we have GPS systems is for the fact that the reason why we have GPS systems is because through the development of space. The reason why we have water purification is to allow us astronauts in the past to access water systems. All of these innovation benefits are guaranteed on our side of the house, which means that we way above them in certainty and the magnitude of impact. We're very proud to stand on closing government.
All right, I thank you everyone for that speech. I now call upon the opposition to conclude the debate as a whole.
All right. Thanks to Abdul for carrying me here. Thanks to all my friends who've been supporting me along the way. Thanks to my family who is not here. Yeah, hope you have a good round. All right, my speech will start. Wait, sorry, am I audible?
You could speak up a little.
Okay, yeah. All right. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so at the core of my partner's argument is that we want to increase equality on Earth. We want to make sure everyone has a fair opportunity at getting the same kinds of things. So, yeah. I'll go into a rebuilding of my partner's case, and I'll point out why it just beats over all the other teams. So at the core of my partner's case is reducing the inequality gap. Space exploration will just benefit the rich people because of it's so expensive. The poor people are locked out of these kinds of benefits because of the inherent costs of being able to engage in space travel. The kind of benefits of space travel are only given to the rich, and this also kind of gives wealthy people a means to just kind of leave the planet and ditch all the kind of trash stuff that's happening on the planet right now. It doesn't give them an incentive to kind of fix up Earth as we know it today, and are really unsustainable, as they've already admitted practices we have on Earth. Yeah.
Thanos in Avengers wanted to kill half the population so everyone can have abundant resources and be equal. Isn't the lack of resources the exact reason and why we should invest in exploration for new resources?
Well, I believe on our side, okay, you guys have kind of characterized that there's no way of making Earth sustainable. Earth is just a trash dump and we should just leave it and abandon it. But the reality for a lot of the poor people who can't afford to just take a rocket and go fly to whatever exoplanet that we can't even get to because it's so expensive. You can't just miraculously look at assuming feasibility and say we're gonna feasibly fly a few galaxies over to a planet that we might not even be able to find because we haven't found it yet, by the way. So yeah, for the rest of these people, they're just going to be stuck on Earth. They're going to be stuck without the kind of capital because these billionaires are bringing away and flying off to space. We should really be fixing the kind of unsustainable practices that we have. And these private businesses, through flowing down their technological benefits from investing in these kinds of AI, for example, that can lead to, for example, better software development or these kinds of economic benefits, these flow down to the common people, to the people that are poor, and our government can stop spending so much on these kinds of space agencies, which they still do spend on, even if not as much nowadays, they can still invest this money into kind of healthcare. So it's not just private companies, first of all, yeah, we're just gonna like increase inequality and have better technology. And while we do admit that there are transferable technologies, as closing half likes to talk about, I feel like there's still value in purpose-built technologies and innovation on Earth. This is like still like to a degree symmetrical on our side. We're still able to have innovation, maybe not just from space. Yeah, okay. In refutation to our OG, they talk about yeah, they basically just say Earth is trash dump that we should leave, which our case already inherently disagrees with that. Yeah, they say like it's hard to solve on Earth or something. Yeah, I just believe our case like weighs over that in terms of like the probability, and also they talk about yeah, how like restrictions will still exist. Because like people won't be left to die. Well, the people with the kind of power that have to like enact this kind of change, the people with all the money, these billionaires, these multi-billion-dollar companies, they don't have incentive to create this change because they've already left the planet. But yeah, I just believe the solution relies in fixing our planet as it is, in investing in our people, in the kind of healthcare, in the kind of education that these poor developing countries should have, and not in just like trying to like flee our problems. Our opening does talk about space debris and like valid concerns about like yeah, just the quality of space travel and exploration that we'll get, but we kind of just like skip over the need for like the feasibility not happening, or sorry, not feasibility not happening, like the feasibility, and we just talk about inequality in general that's happening regardless of how space travel is executed. Just like inherently, it's the creation of an inequality gap and only benefiting wealthy people. Oh, sorry. But yeah. Yeah, and I'll just go back to closing just for a bit longer. They talk about how you'll get jobs from space, and how you're even going to get like technology and jobs in the process, even if you aren't able to reap benefits from space travel. But also, we believe that these jobs could also just be like created like in more abundance by like purpose-built spending into the Earth, into creating this economy and like recovering from things like inflation and stuff. I'm just so proud to oppose.
Stop with the fire. You'll be debating.